All right. Thanks, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. So the Visioning Task Force is very excited to bring you this information. As you all recall, during the winter congregational meeting, Bill and Bromley gave a bit of a kind of a teaser of what this Visioning Task Force was going to be about. Campaigns are different from the enlistment campaign. As you all know, every fall we have an enlistment campaign to tithe and to raise funding for the budget for the church, the overall yearly annual operational budget. A capital campaign is different. A capital campaign typically is using other sources of funding to pay for projects, work, other very critical items that are integral budget. So the bigger ticket items, the sanctuary, vacation wing, things like that. So you can see the difference between capital campaign and a regular enlistment campaign. Tristan, if you could, I'm in charge of the slide, right? All right. So how did this come? There was a committee that was formed by Church Council, the Financial Sustainability and Stewardship Committee, that released their final report in November and shared it with Church Council. So that wasn't just about a capital campaign. There was a whole litany of different type of recommendations coming from that critical committee. But one of capital campaign in a multi-stage format. Stage one, and that's currently underway, for solicitation of cash contributions rather than pledges. The pledges for your enlistment. So this is cash contribution campaign. Addressing the most urgent needs, things like the roof that desperately needed to be replaced over the West Wing. And then also looking at how should we fund the next stages of the campaign, right? So meet our immediate needs, but also what are, and then pay. So stage one is underway right now. We haven't obviously this point forward. So the Visioning Task Force is not the capital campaign task force, just a group of folks on how this visioning process, which is exactly what this task force has been working on. So it's not clicking. Thank you. All right, one more back. Whoa. Now it caught up, I guess. One sec. Tristan, can you help me? Can you help me? I always should have been, should go all the way back. Technical difficulties, be with you one moment. Okay, should be like slide 3. No, not touching anything.
Have you got it in animation? No, not animation. Slide. Have you got it in slideshow?
Okay, I think we're good. Yep, the slide 3. Cool. All right, components of a UCG campaign. So the last capital campaigns from many years ago. Again, the capital campaign in the 90s. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. Sanctuary, building the sanctuary, the renovation of the education wing. And this isn't the renovation of the education wing that we accomplished just a couple of years ago. That, of course, was the residual funding from the PPP loan. But this is actually the education wing when they built the education wing some years ago and then also renovated it subsequent to that. Discussions of a campaign at Church Council and at Council Exec. So the leadership of the church over the last couple of years, along with that report coming from the Financial Sustainability Committee, have had discussions about what would a capital campaign look like? Should we have one? What would be the timing for it? And of course, most importantly, what are the projects or the mission work that it would be part of a capital campaign? The financial sustainability report noted the extreme lack of reserves that we have as a congregation, and also the need for additional revenue sources. Think public parking, right? Revenue sources, additional rentals of our space, the consideration we did for the charter school last year. So again, all these opportunities for additional revenue because we definitely had an imbalance between operating budget needs and funding coming in, revenue sources coming in. And then overall financial sustainability, but we also discussed not only how to take care of just the physical property, but how can we actually expand our ministries and expand the work that we do as a church. Board of Business dug deep into an analysis of what might be needed for a capital campaign, and also for what projects we would need to fund with the capital campaign funding. Buildings and campus grounds assessment report. So there was a report last spring that looked at our overall building and grounds. We actually had a professional report written, and they looked in attics, and they looked, in behind things and under things to see what is actually going on with our physical plan. A topographical survey, so looking at the groundwork, like how is the water running, how is the drainage, how is our overall landscape, not just physical plants and beautiful landscaping, but the physical flow of the landscape itself. And then Board of Business created a building and grounds committee who then looked at all the projects that were needed on campus and then prioritized that list of projects. Okay, next slide, Tristan, please. And then the task force formation and process. So we knew all of the work needed to be done, but then what are we going to do to actually make it happen? So Bromley and Bill Ziegel gave a congregational meeting update, and that really helped guide the congregation by articulating what were our dreams for the future going to be, determining how that infrastructure and other needs might actually help us achieve those dreams, and then propose a capital campaign to help meet those needs. That's the work we've been doing since January through today. So for the last 5 months, that's what this group has been doing. The task force has been comprised of Kim Cruz, Tim Martin, Bromley McClanahan, Tony Miller, myself, Jim White, and Bill Ziegel. We've been meeting weekly on Zoom as part of the process. And in the next slide, you'll actually see some of the activities that we've been doing. Our deliverables are the initial exploration of the congregational support for a capital campaign. So would the congregation be behind this type of capital campaign? And when would the timing be? What's the ideal timing? Review and prioritization of the building and grounds team's project list. So we looked at all of the ideas that the building and grounds committee came up with, and we said, what are the priorities that they recommended? And then also within our group, what were the priorities that we could see that the congregation could get behind? And what are some of the other projects that weren't on their list that we also thought would be critical? Recommendation whether to hire a campaign consultant. Yeah, it's not just going to the congregation and saying, hey, we have all these great projects, we need your money, please give. It's much more than that. It's huge. So there are professionals that actually are capital campaign consultants that you can hire to actually run your campaign, give you advice, organize it, structure it, and project manage. There's actually one person that we've been working with, works with she's actually a minister with UCC, so she's a staff person out of, I think, Chicago. She actually had the seminar, if you all attended the seminar about a month ago, and we actually had a call with Jill last week as well. Again, it's initially just to get advice at this point. We actually have not hired a consultant. Again, the deliverable for the task force was whether we should hire a consultant, because there is obviously funding that we need to be outlaid for that. Process for the capital campaign timeline and the next steps. So kind of that's where we're at today, kind of what are the next steps? And then develop a theme or a focus for our campaign. So what would be that theme or focus so the congregation could get behind it? All right, next slide, please. So here's what the task force has been doing. We've been having seminars, chalk talks, and congregational survey. Daniel spoke at a seminar a few weeks ago about Money, Mission, Me, a spiritual approach to lay out the case for money as a spiritual mini-me. If you all were able to attend that seminar, it It was wonderful. We also had the Sunday Chalk Talk service where the congregation as a whole expressed their dreams for not only UCG, but the world in general. And what are the to achieving those dreams, and then how can we overcome those barriers? We compiled that information, actually Bill compiled that information, tons and tons and tons of notes, great information, and then he summarized it. And that information was made available to everyone. I think it was in the last newsletter linked to those survey results, that Chalk Talk results. Evening seminar, Jill White was that UCC staffer I mentioned, shared potential role of consultants in planning and carrying out a capital campaign. Again, starting that educational process for the congregation. And then the survey that you all saw more recently, that was the interesting survey where we had the projects and we said, suppose you had $100 and you wanted to contribute to these projects and spread out that $100, how would you like to do that? And I'll show you some results of that information as well. So those proposed projects were broken down. This doesn't add up to 100, close, but it doesn't quite add up to 100. There's some rounding stuff going on. But essentially, you get the idea, though. Like if everyone had that $100, 1993, so almost $20, folks were interested in a commercial kitchen. Kind of fascinating, huh? You would think might not be perhaps what you would put your $20 to. But think about what a commercial kitchen could do. We could rent out this space we already rented out for weddings and events and things like that. But if we had a commercial kitchen, folks could actually cook in our facilities, the amount of rental income that would generate from that. Courtyard, and then we've been talking about the courtyard quite a bit. As you all know, there's bricks that are misaligned. There are drainage issues with the courtyard. So looking at how we need to revamp the courtyard. Capital reserves, putting money away, raising money to put it away and let it earn money for us. Looking at the office west wing, so renovations of the office wing and then the west wing, which we're in here. Parking, safety. Safety, we looked at things like, currently all the church council members have keys, all the staff have keys, other folks have keys, so there's lots of keys going around. So safety could be something such as those keypads with the little cards, the key cards that are electronic, so that you can actually know exactly who's entering the building and what time. And then if for whatever reason we needed to disable a key card, you could do that electronically.
You can also lock and unlock remotely, which is like amazing.
That was really nice. Because I'm sure, have you all scrambled like, who's got a key? Who's got a key? Somebody's got a key around here, right? Debt retirement. So we do have currently debt. We have a mortgage on the sanctuary. We have the Cornerstone loan for the roof. So that type of debt, we could look to retire that if we raise money to be able to do that. Missionary or mission work towards our mission, putting money into the endowment. We currently have an endowment. It's doing better. I'm co-chair of the endowment board this year, and it's doing much better year to date than it was the last year, for sure. Adding a second story. So we have a second story, or not adding, sorry, renovating the second story. So we have a second story. If you all have never been up there, there's stairs right here that go above the kitchen. It's actually the youth room is how it's used today, but could that be re-envisioned into something completely different? And then renovation of other outdoors. So not just the courtyard, but our other outdoor areas. Like we have the garden, the memory garden in the back behind the chapel. A lot of people don't know about that. There's a big wooden fence there, right? You don't really know that in the chapel or back there, but they are. So looking at other renovations. These are as folks were looking at it, these were kind of the priorities that were given. It wasn't a huge response to the survey. We would have liked to have gotten a little bit bigger response, but it was really helpful information. Next slide, please. One of the questions we ask on the survey is, how enthusiastic are you about a campaign? Obviously, we've had giving a little bit of educational information from January until today, but just to kind of get a temperature check of how folks are, how much involvement or how much enthusiasm they would have. And you can see it's split pretty much 50-50 here of the responses. Again, not a huge amount of responses, less than 100. But, it's always good to see like somewhat very enthusiastic, we want to see like, and then enthusiastic, at least it's not dipping the other way where folks are like, we are not enthusiastic about this at all, right? Yeah, that would not be a good sign. But there's obviously room for improvement there as we get more education and more information out to the congregation. Next slide, please. All right, next steps in our project timeline. This has been in concert with the ministerial transition process and the enlistment campaign. So again, I'll just mention one more time. So the enlistment campaign in the fall is for our operating budget. So this capital campaign would be outside of that. And also we want to make sure the timing is would reflect and not be confusing for folks like, wait, which campaign am I giving to you right now? To separate them, be very distinctly separating those out between enlistment campaign in the fall, which is our operating budget, and capital campaign to pay for those projects or other projects that I went over just a minute ago. So May, June, evaluate the UCC recommended campaign consultants. So Jill White, the UCC staff person, gave us a number of names, and we're going to be evaluating those consultants to see which one we might recommend to the congregation. At our congregational meeting next Sunday, Bill will be giving a task force update. So similar to what I'm doing, but it's in a very abbreviated version. We want to make sure we had a forum like this where you all could ask the questions, get the information, dig a little bit deeper than we could at a congregational meeting. Bill.
Yes, I wanted to point out that next Sunday I'm going to be at my granddaughter's graduation.
It'll be Tim.
Oh, Tim, thank you.
It'll be Tim.
Thank you. Okay. So Bill, it will not be Bill, it will be Tim Martin. I know Tim's online today. Thanks, Tim. Summer of 2023, so this coming summer, one or more listening sessions to discuss the results of the Chalk Talk. So all of that great information that Bill compiled into a summarized version. Looking deeper at those proposed projects and the survey results that we received from the congregation, and then also just receive additional input. Again, this time period from January to today was the visioning process. We have not started a capital campaign. This is us talking, discerning, ensuring that we're hearing everyone's voice and everyone has a place at the table to be able to discuss should or when we would do a capital campaign. And going into the fall, again, during the enlistment time period, continue the congregational conversations, and then also looking at what our campaign goals might be. December, we would actually ask for church council approval for a campaign, and then going into the congregational meeting next January, we would ask the congregation for approval for a capital campaign. There is, the UCC consultant has they have a readiness assessment. So it's a study. If we decide to use that particular consultant, they have essentially a survey of type that assesses whether you as a congregation or our congregation is ready to actually have a capital campaign. And it's a scoring system. And it's like really a pulse check on where we would be and on gauging how successful a capital campaign may be. So that would be like in the February timeframe. So the capital campaign, again, with what UCC is recommending, is 13 to 15 weeks. So that would take us from March to June. So right as the summer would be beginning, middle of June, we would be completing the capital campaign. All right, next slide. So hold on one sec, Kitty. Kitty was asking what would happen in June with the capital campaign. So let me just finish the slides and I'll answer that question in just a moment, Kitty. So I just want to mention the Chalk Talk results. Again, I think we're going to have another listening session specific to the Chalk Talk results. These are just kind of the highlights, the very big picture information we gathered from the Chalk Talk. And this was the Sunday Chalk Talk that we asked, like, what were your dreams for UCG in the world? What were the barriers and how to overcome those barriers? Culture, togetherness, service, sustainability, both environmental and fiscal, and funding stewardship. Those were the overall broad values that we gathered and surmised from the Chalk Talk information. Next slide. All right, so these are the questions and time for our conversation. So on the next slide, if you could advance, Tristan. This is some of the questions that we thought might be helpful to start these conversations. And Kitty, I'm going to answer your question first when we get to it. So culture, what can we do to enhance our culture that values all individuals and is committed to creating a better future for everyone? Togetherness, what can we do to promote a sense of togetherness and shared purpose, service, What can we do to enhance service, giving, and spiritual growth of individuals in our congregation? Next slide, please. Sustainability. What can we do to serve as an example of responsible environmental stewardship while also contributing to the wider effort to address climate change and promote sustainability? And finally, funding. What can we do to develop additional funding to maintain the physical church, support the church's programs and ministries, and to ensure that the church is a safe and welcoming place for all? So those are just kind of like some prompt questions to think about as we start this conversation. So Tristan, if you wouldn't mind taking on the slides and so I can see the folks on Zoom. Great. And so Kitty, I think we're going to pass the mic. We'll let you ask your question one more time just so the folks that on Zoom can hear it, and then I'll respond. Or if folks also, Bill or Jim or Tim or anyone else on the committee that's with us, again, also help me out.
I saw quite a few months of planning and organizing all this stuff, but then when it came down to having the capital campaign, it just seems like just a couple of months. Is that it? I mean, it's going to be written into that.
That's yeah. So Kitty was asking about like, wow, that seems like such a short amount of time, right? 13 to 15 weeks. That's the recommendation that as the UCC model, the model that Jill White, the consultant from UCC, we decide how long the capital campaign is. That was just the recommendation if we went with their model, 13 to 15 weeks. And that actually is a tight time frame, obviously. But think about it, it's also like very similar to how we do our enlistment campaign. It's about the same amount of time we would do an enlistment campaign. So there would be a really big push for that. And Bromley, do you have anything to share? I'll repeat it for anyone at home.
Yeah, so those are the times that we're having meetings and conversations and writing letters and holding small groups and asking for commitments.
Yep.
So after that, then the gifts can continue to come in. Sometimes folks do a 3-year cycle or a 5-year period. So it's right.
Gotcha. So Bromley was just saying that 13 to 15 weeks isn't actually where all the money is going to be raised, the capital campaign funding is going to be raised. It's actually the education piece and actually the kind of how we do the enlistment campaign. But some folks actually do on a 3-year or 5-year cycle for actually the funding to come into the church. Question?
I like the idea of this readiness survey, but I noticed that it is planned to occur after the congregation votes for the capital campaign. And it seemed to me if I was in a congregational meeting, I would want to know about the results of a readiness survey before I voted overall on the matter. So
Makes
I don't
sense.
know, has that come up, or what are your thoughts about that?
We were trying to line up the timing of it as well. And it's not ideal because we wanted to, at the January congregational meeting, we always vote on the budget and we wanted to have them very distinct. If it turns out that the readiness assessment has any kind of concern, like we weren't ready, we would definitely consider calling a special congregational meeting to consider whether in fact we should go forward with it or not. There's money that would be committed to have the readiness assessment. There's actually funding that's required for that. So we would need congregational approval to even go forward with the readiness assessment, but we would definitely take the outcome of that information to heart to say, are we actually ready? And we would have another congregational meeting. Bromley, would you add anything to that?
Right, oh, wait, Rob, hang on. Oh.
Yeah, there's probably a couple ways to do it. Certainly the motion at the congregational meeting could make that decision contingent on the outcome of the readiness assessment.
As we heard from Jill, there are some savings to be found if you contract with, I think Jill, but with other consultants as well, to do the readiness survey and the campaign at the same time. But doing the readiness survey, if the results are not sort of high enough that say we should proceed, doesn't obligate us to move forward at that time. So that's the reason to sort of pair them together so that we can save like $8,000.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of savings for this. Next question. Yeah, right here in the front, Glenn.
One of the things that occurred to me when we went through the charter school process was that, at least in my evaluation, the needs for the users of the facility, when you started looking at safety, drop-off, kitchen, bathrooms, is that we would be obligated to make a decent amount of improvements, and then probably with the additional use, we would have maintenance addition. So my point is, as we look at income streams of leasing things out, I'd like to think that we're looking also at the available use of what we can offer and the additional maintenance that it could make.
That's good.
That's my only comment, that we're looking at both sides rather than being excited about an income stream.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Thank you.
Not being real familiar with these kinds of campaigns, I have kind of a neophyte question. And that is the consultant and whatever, Miss Jill, who has been working with you, did she have any potential ideas for raising the capital funds from outside sources other than from within the congregation itself?
I don't recall anyone. Tim, do you recall any specific so like grant funding? Are you saying like any type of
I don't
outside?
think Jill never mentioned that, but I know that has come up in our conversations as a committee, that engaging community stakeholders is important, probably both in terms of getting some input on what our stakeholders might want from capital improvements in terms of how we interact with them and serve them, but also there might be some potential for funding. So that has come up. We haven't talked about it recently, but I do recall us discussing that a little bit.
And it's definitely something we could continue to explore, obviously, as part of the capital campaign, like what would be the balance of internal funding sources, as well as what are the opportunities for external funding sources. Bromley.
Sorry.
And then Kitty.
You may recall that the Board of Children, Youth, and Family applied for a large grant back in February and talked about that a little bit at the congregational meeting. And so that's funding that includes some capital improvement funds that would enable us to do further ministry and work with the kids and parents in our community, but then also programming things. So as we're thinking about goals and we're thinking about outside sources, there's really the challenge is for us to be creative and thinking about, nobody's going to give us money to do something that just serves us, right? So if we can think creatively about, again, how we can reach out to and find the intersections between what are important to us as a congregation and what might be of greater service to the wider community, that's sort of the sweet spot of outside funding.
Kitty, go ahead.
I would like to know, since in the past few years, I've been getting requests from various groups that I support, and they want me to say that I'm going to leave them so much when I'm no longer here. And are we going to be looking for that kind of thing too?
That definitely could be part of the discussion, kind of an endowment type aspect. I know the Board of Endowment is actually definitely going to be looking at those opportunities, kind of those legacy giving, some call it, endowment giving. So I think again, that balance of not only the enlistment campaign, but also the work of the endowment committee will also have to weave into how a capital campaign might look, because we want to not confuse folks too, because they're all very distinct things. Capital campaigns are generally, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Bromley, or anyone else on the committee, but capital campaign is generally not, and this was mentioned by the consultant, folks usually have part of their budget for their amount of money they pay for their rent, right, or their mortgage and their electricity, and the money that goes to the enlistment campaign or the annual operating budget is kind of funds from your budget, like what you have monthly or are able to provide to the church or other organizations, versus a capital campaign, generally speaking, and this is from the consultant, She's saying that's from other sources of income, or sorry, other sources of savings that folks might have. That might be some stocks and bonds they might have. That may be some savings that they may have. That's generally speaking how capital campaigns balance out between the operating funds that folks might give from their monthly kind of bank account versus like a capital campaign, which is typically from other sources. Hope that makes sense. That's right.
This is not a concept question. It's a technical question.
Okay.
It reflects on my personality as well. But I filled out the questionnaire of how to allocate $100 for these various projects. And the kitchen renovation figure was listed as $400,000. And also the courtyard improvements were listed as $400,000. And I thought that was a decimal point error because I was trying to figure out how can you spend $400,000 to convert our kitchen to a commercial kitchen. So I guess my question would be, where did these figures come from? And what do you think about those? The others look appropriate, but those look
I'm
pretty
going to
high
ask
to me.
Jim to help me out with that with the mic. He's on the Building and Grounds Committee.
Yes, it was quite a challenge to come up with any sort of number for both of those items. And obviously, this is not based on any sort of actual proposal and a bid. Yes, a commercial kitchen is very expensive. The equipment that goes into that is expensive. And our current kitchen space is very aged. So we're looking at both a gut of that kitchen, replacing all of the cabinets and replacing all of the appliances. And that does get to several $100,000. I don't know if it's going to be 400, but we went with the big number just to be safe. And obviously there would be much more visiting and evaluation of what exactly we would need and what that would cost before committing to a particular plan. And I'm going to pass the microphone now to Glenn, who's the expert on the courtyard.
Knew that was coming. We're in more or less the same boat, not having had the ability to comprehensively look at what the courtyard could be, but to recognize a couple of critical problems. One is fairly serious drainage issues related to a couple of times a year, water approaching the office and approaching here, and a serious concern about erosion at the foundation on this corner and cracks appearing on the building. So drainage is a serious problem. We have no easy way of solving it because the grade is higher such that water doesn't drain to the center of the courtyard. It's been elevated over years to actually drain towards the building. And the only way to solve that, we think, is to remove some or all of the trees to lower it and getting positive drainage. We don't like the idea, but we have to address that could be it. The other issue that also relates to the topography and the surface is it's a very unstable surface. We have, at least in my opinion, an obligation to all of our perhaps older, and I'm one of them now, the ability to be stable and walk and sit at the proper height of seats. It really doesn't meet any standards of public use. So hence a pretty sizable number if you thought of an entire renovation, replacing with paving of some sort rather than mulch, and infrastructure and things like that. Maybe it's high, but I think the choice was let's go ahead and put in a big number, and as we research it, we can fine tune it. That's the best answer we can give based on the concerns we had as responsible committee people.
Thanks.
I could elaborate, I could elaborate briefly on the kitchen because, I think some sticker shock is normal when we see numbers like this. But one thing that helped me put the kitchen in perspective is, for instance, thinking about the children's wing renovation that just happened. That was essentially there was a little bit of plumbing and some repair work, but that was mostly a cosmetic renovation involving lighting, flooring, paint, and so on. And that cost about $100,000. What we're talking about in the kitchen, we can't even plug in the crock pots for chili lunch without blowing all the kitchen breakers. So, that kitchen renovation will involve all those things Jim listed, but probably also electrical, plumbing, and someone mentioned, it was probably you, Charlie, now that I hear your comment, you can build a house for that. Well, yeah, it almost is that. And we're also not necessarily committed to a full-blown commercial kitchen. There might be something between sort of the tiny residential that we have now and a full-blown commercial that ends up being more appropriate for our needs.
Well, my hope would be that if we are moving forward, we can drill down on these two concepts with some more details and some estimates about each of these projects, the kitchen and the courtyard. Even given everything that's said about the problems that exist, it's just my personal thought that you're still way too high on both of those costs. And so it'd be nice to have a little more detail. But I do appreciate the concern about things costing more than I used to think they would cost.
And I would say too that the projects that we were listing on that, the pretend $100 that you had to spend, that's not to say any of those projects are committed to. Like, we are evaluating which projects we would want to fund with a capital campaign, or what mission work we would want to fund, or what other type of outreach we'd want to fund, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, whatever that mix is. That's the educational piece that we're in the fact finding we're going to be doing over the summer into the fall, and having more of these listening sessions so we know where the congregation has their support. Jim?
And just to follow up, also from the buildings and grounds people, and where we have interacted with the visioning task force, on that spending proposal that we just did with where you put your $100, there was a given of a big chunk of money that has to go to things that absolutely have to be done on the infrastructure front. Tim told us about the electrical in the kitchen. And Charlie, when we start talking about other things that involve plumbing, both renovating the bathrooms and the kitchen, this entire campus is now run off one residential water supply line. Think about that. This is like this is the same supply you have for your house. It's a big undertaking to get us to where we need to be, and then bring the commercial supply lines up to each place where it needs to be.
Thanks, Jim.
Let me add one other thing.
Next time you guys got to sit together.
Yeah. One thing I should have mentioned, at least those of us that were working on the courtyard, the idea wasn't that we were going to prepare solution number one and offer it. The idea was to have some ongoing dialogue, to listen to what the congregation believes. Now, if the congregation suggests we're going to keep the trees, we'll just sort of gamble that things are okay, we're going to do some sort of modest drainage. I'm a landscape architect. I'm used to fighting for the trees. The last thing I really want to do is to take any trees down. However, I deal with a lot of drainage and I know where water goes. So the bottom line is we want to have an extended dialogue. We want to have and listen to where the congregation wants to go. And wherever that takes us, if we can explain the positives and negatives, if that's where we want to go, we're all for it. And whatever those numbers are, in our opinion, they are.
I guess I'm sort of with Charlie, those numbers on all those projects were mind-boggling, because but we absolutely have to, like Jim said, we absolutely have to do some of these things. We don't want the building falling down. But I think given our experience with the charter school, there was overwhelming disapproval for that. I mean, I was actually in favor of it because I thought we needed the money. But there was just no support for that. And so I think we need to be a little careful going forward with this campaign. If we present such huge numbers, it's going to feel like it's something we can't do. And so I think we need to be, have some sort of ranges on things. And this is what it would take to do this. This is what it would take to do this. And this is what it would take to do this. And sort of, so that people feel like there are options. It's not all the $500,000 projects.
Right. I think it's what Glenn mentioned and Tim mentioned too, that perhaps have like in the discussions to say, what if we have three options? The full blown, for instance, commercial kitchen versus like a modest commercial kitchen, which is usable. What would those two look like? What were the details and what are the cost estimates behind those, and see which one the congregation gets behind, if that's one of the projects that we select we want to do. Or the courtyard, as Glenn said, what if we do a full blown everything, like just take it down to like ground level and start from scratch, versus keep the trees, keep this, keep that, but do something more in the middle. Like what do those cost factors look like? So I definitely think that is going to be part of the discussion, as well as the projects as a whole, like which projects will the congregation get behind? Because as you saw, we kind of had a whole laundry list up there, and there were some that were at the bottom for $1.55. Like that's how much money was going. Folks obviously weren't supportive of that. So that's very telling. We need to have more listing sessions so we understand and be able to fine tune what exactly the needs are, not only we think they are, but what are folks actually going to get behind. Right here.
I really enjoyed hearing what Glenn had to say on detail on why it was so expensive. And I think we need to have enough detail, for instance, on the kitchen. Do we want to do family promise? What are our values on how we're going to use that kitchen? What's the function of that kitchen to meet our dream of the church's goal of being a community facility? What? Yeah, a community asset, as Bill said. So I really liked hearing what the reason is. And the other thing, I'm on another project, another renovation project. We want to make sure you aren't doing this shortcut and then you have to redo it when you do a major renovation. So we want to make sure that we're doing it in steps so that we're not, we're adding to, but not having to redo.
Thank you. Jim has a comment here.
Yes, getting to that kitchen idea, being able to do receptions, wedding receptions and the like, doesn't have to be the primary driver of having a commercial kitchen. Sue and I were previously members of a church that invested in a commercial kitchen, and it did a tremendous thing for the weekly Wednesday afternoon gathering of children. There was a community dinner in the church where adults who didn't even have kids would sit and chaperone at a table, and it was a dinner cooked each week in the church, and it was just a wonderful community of those kids of all ages. And so we would enable opportunities like that as well.
Thanks, Jim. Any questions online? Anyone on Zoom? Any questions or comments?
I've asked them a couple of times.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. All right.
They didn't come up with it.
All right. Ann.
I wonder if there's a way to get people who have the money and are really interested to chime in and just do a private tally with somebody so that folks who don't have any more to give than they're already giving have some assurance that this can fly.
Gotcha. Yeah, good recommendation. Thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments, concerns?
This has been enlightening to hear the opinions. It helps for at least a committee that's
Agree. Yeah, Glenn was just saying for anyone online, it's been very helpful for him and I'm sure others on the building and grounds task force who've been in a room together, trying to think of these things and think of the projects and the prioritization of those to actually hear feedback and hear everyone's opinion on this. It's definitely, I can speak for myself and I think also for others on the task force for the capital campaign visioning, definitely helpful to hear. Because again, we're meeting weekly, but it's just the group of us talking about how this might be laid out. And it's the congregation as a whole that will be committing to doing this, not just this task force, not just the folks that will be kind of running it or focused on it, but all of us together collectively as a congregation. Any other last questions or comments before we end? All right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody online too.